everyone can see my screen. So I'm going to do a bit of a presentation. I'll just explain a little bit who I am, and we'll take it from there. So my name is Louise Liebenberg. I was born and raised in South Africa, and that is where I have my accent from. I studied at university there. I got involved with sheep farming in South Africa. When I was 22, I actually moved to the Netherlands, started a big grazing sheep company there doing prescription grazing. We did the first shepherding school there, and in around 1992, I started working with Livestock Guardian dogs for the first time. In 2008, moved to Canada, have a sheep farm here, also raise purebred Angus cattle. So, I've lived on many continents, I've traveled extensively, and one of my passions in life is wildlife. My other passion is ranching. So sometimes I feel a little conflicted because there's almost an expected approach from, if you raise sheep or cattle, you should hate coyotes and wolves and bears and predators. And yet I feel that they all belong here. And I do think that as ranchers, we can find ways to farm and ranch alongside predators. It's not easy. I'm not going to, paint things with a glittery paintbrush and say, oh, it never happens. And this predation is very real, and it's something we have to manage. I've sat on various boards regarding wildlife conflict management all over the world. I've spoken at various conferences, also all over the world, spoke to lots of shepherds also in Europe that are struggling with the re-emergence of wolves in Europe, how we manage it, how we do it. My first passion was actually herding dogs. I used to train and raise border collies, did a lot of sheepdog trialing, worked with the dogs because we did a lot of grazing. And as more predation became a bit more of a problem, I became more interested in the Livestock Guardian dogs. I'm really well versed in both kinds of dogs. When I'm giving the talk, my terminology might be mixed up. So sometimes I might be talking about a wolf, but it doesn't really matter. A predator is a predator, whether it's a dingo in Australia or a jackal in South Africa or coyotes or wolves here. So, just take the term a little loosely, that when I talk about a wolf, I'm kind of meaning every predator. So I ranch up in northern Alberta, up in the Peace Country. Our ranch has wolves living right on the ranch. We have coyotes. We have all kinds of predators here, bears that love to eat the oats. Of course, eagles come around. We buy a bunch of big lakes, so we have a lot of eagles, and of course all the other Canadian wildlife, and all which I feel belong here in our area. In total, we farm about it would be close to 1,700 acres between owned land and rented land. We have ewes, we have cattle, we have some horses, we do a bit of grain and a bit of hay, so kind of a mixed operation. When we deal with predation, this is actually one of my most favorite sayings, and you kind of have to think about it for a minute, but when you're dealing with predators, hope is not a strategy for success. So hoping you won't get predated on, hoping that things will go well, is not like having an actual plan of what to do when things do go wrong. And, if you're in the sheep farming business, things do go wrong with a multitude of predators because everything likes to eat sheep. So, don't rely on hope. It could go well for many years, but there's definitely more things we can implement to make sure that we're a little more proactive. So, our MD where I live has had a wolf bounty going since about 2010. And it's actually not been very successful. People think it's successful, but if you look at compensation numbers, how many wolf kills still happen every year, you actually realize it's not successful. It's a placebo. People feel good that there's a wolf bounty, but it's not actually having a significant effect on predation. There's been lots of research that shows that while getting rid of like a sheep killing coyote, or a pack of wolves that are predating on calves, is a good way to like short-term solve your problem. Ultimately, doing sort of a kill here and a kill there actually doesn't really solve any problems, and in many cases you actually get more conflicts. So that is something to be aware of, that if you're going to do like a lethal control practice, if it involves wolves, you kind of have to take out that entire pack, because leaving one or two, you're actually going to end up with more problems than before. In South Africa, they did some studies there to see whether lethal control to combat like predation versus non-lethal, which was cheaper, which was more effective, things like that, and actually found that lethal control was less practical. Anyone who has ever gone out wolf hunting will know it's extremely difficult. It's time consuming. It's difficult unless you are a really good trapper. They're crafty animals. They know what to do. It's difficult. Snaring coyotes is a little easier, but it takes time and effort. It's actually very costly as well. If you look at some of the programs that they have in the US, where they go aerial shooting wolves that are problematic, it costs hundreds and thousands of dollars. And it's actually money that I feel could be better spent in actually putting in or implementing specific things that can help with predation. Rather than just throwing it after dead wolves, we can maybe implement better fencing or fladry, or more extension work, more help in that regard. But that's just my personal opinion. And they actually found that livestock losses increase over time with like a lethal approach. That lethal approach being, the shoot a coyote, shoot a wolf, but not actually being very systematic about it. All predation, however you deal with it, you need a community solution. It's no good if you're doing your best and your neighbor leaves carcasses lying around on his field, because that'll attract predators. Their problem becomes your problem. So, you kind of have to look at it a bit like the Bear Smart program, the communities that can sign up for Bear Smart. You're trying to teach the entire community how to do things better. And so we really have to look at like community solutions. What can we do better? What can I do that my neighbor can implement that doesn't cost a lot of money, that can help control, predation problems? The biggest reason why predation actually starts is the scavenging of dead carcasses. So if you do not have a good way to dispose of dead animals, if you are the reason why, like you're just dumping them on the back 40, then you can sort of expect some predation issues, because it often starts with the scavenging of carcasses, and that keeps those animals on your farm. And when there are no carcasses, then they'll start moving on to your live animals. When dealing with predators, we also sort of have to understand predators and, how their breeding patterns are, what controls them naturally, things like that. So there's some statistics on the screen here of, some things that have been found. I think it's with a lot of scientists. Sometimes the science fits the story that the scientists want to tell, and sometimes it is really very independent. But none of these numbers are always perfect, because it really will depend on your area. If you say, I never have wolf problems, well, maybe you don't live in an area where there are a lot of wolves, so it is all a little bit relative. But we do need to understand some basics. So, for example, with coyotes, they're monogamous. They form a breeding pair for life. That breeding pair will raise those pups in a specific area. They have a stable pack set up as such. They raise those pups together. Those pups eventually leave and have to find new territories. So they will keep a territory to themselves, chase out other coyotes. as soon as you remove, for example, one coyote, she's going to try and breed with whatever she can. You're going to have less chance of pups surviving because she might not be able to feed them all. It'll be easier for her to take lambs rather than go and hunt rabbits or, you know, fawns, things like that. So, you know, the pack structure is actually really important to have a stable pack situation. It's also a lot easier to manage if you do have to go to some management strategies. So you also see when there's a lot of hunting pressure, the litter sizes of coyote pairs often get bigger. So they're raising more pups to try and compensate for that. If you shoot a big bear that's in your area, it's going to create a vacuum. More younger transient bears are going to move into that area to try and fill that space. So you might be creating a bigger problem. If you have a good bear in your area, that's not a problem. It's better served to leave that bear alone because he'll keep other bears out. Where get rid of that big bear, you might get 4 or 5 young bears moving in, and those are the ones that usually get into trouble, break into your grain bins, you know, and are problematic. So, you know, understanding a little bit of your different predators, what they do and how they work is really quite important. So if you look at that slide really carefully, on the top of one of the bales in the middle there's a coyote laying on the bale watching my sheep graze there. I didn't have my dog out there at that moment because I wanted to actually get this picture, but you know, my dogs would be very determined in chasing that coyote away. They would not make that coyote feel comfortable staying there and watching what's going on. So that's where the coyote is. So often people get into a little bit of a panic if, you know, when there's a predation event. They don't really know what to do, what to happen. And the first impulse is generally, you know, let's go out and shoot that predator. And although it's maybe a good idea if it is a continual problem, there are some other steps that we should maybe take and consider beforehand. So here in Alberta, if you have kills done by coyote, you do not get compensation. There's no compensation that pays out for coyote kills. But if you suspect it is a wolf or a bear or an eagle, you can apply for compensation. So you really do want to do some steps there to ensure that you preserve
Prime
the kill
Big Deal
site.
Days are here with 2 days of big
Oh,
savings
just hold on a minute.
Prime members.
I think
You'll
I've
feel
got.
like a VIP.
Oops.
Right this way. Your hair dryer deal is waiting.
Hold on a minute.
Deals from clothes to electronics. It's on Prime Big Deal Days, October 10th and 11th.
I have something going on my YouTube that I was going to show you later. Okay, that should be. I should have got rid of that sound now. So human nature is, of course, to have revenge, and a lot of people say, you know, go shoot them, hang them on a fence, and it chases the coyotes away. But really, there's been little evidence that that actually works. So generally, we're pretty shocked when we come across a carcass because it is really, it's like Murphy's Law. They will always get your kid's sheep or your bottle calf or your favorite cow. You know, that's just seems to be how predators work, and that is always very unfortunate when that happens. So we generally get a little angry. We want revenge and retaliation, which is a very understandable human emotion. And we can get a little scared. I know when we had a wolf pack living here on the ranch, we were really concerned, like, is it going to escalate? How are we going to manage it? The fear is legitimate because what if you can't stop the predation? I am friends with a sheep farmer who had 100 sheep. They were losing one a day to coyotes. And they said, you know, in 3 months' time, we're going to be out of the sheep business unless we can control the problem that we have. So it's a very legitimate emotion to have. We can often feel really frustrated because it is tough to stop it. I mean, if you have coyotes coming in and grabbing a lamb a day, it's frustrating to try and control that and stop that because you don't always see the coyote coming in. But we can have a certain amount of preparedness, and that is part of what we need to do. And look for solutions that work in your situation. Not every solution will work on every farm. So we really need like a toolbox full of all kinds of tools and see what works for everyone. So for example, one of them is using Livestock Guardian dogs, but not every situation warrants the use of a Livestock Guardian dog. So some of the things we need to look at is maybe have like a bit of a risk assessment plan, like where my sheep are grazing, when do I have lambs? Do I have lambs out on pasture in the middle of May when those coyote females are trying to feed their young? Can we change it? Our farm, we lamb in January, primarily because I don't want those lambs out on pasture because I know they're very vulnerable. And we like to sell most of our lambs before the busy summer season starts, where we are haying, dealing with the cattle, things like that. So we've kind of changed our lambing system around to suit us, but it also helps keep predation low. You know, are we just turning sheep out on a full quarter of section to graze, or do we use cross fencing? Do we use electric nets? You know, look at what you can do to manage it better. So one of the things we do if coyote predation is sort of heavy and putting pressure on the sheep, I actually make my pastures way smaller. I move them faster. Having smaller pastures mean that the dogs can better overview what's going on. Where if you turn them out on a whole quarter section of land, 1 or 2 dogs is really going to struggle to manage with that. One of the things, our farm is on an elk migration route. So we have elk constantly moving through the farm, which means we have wolves constantly following the elk. So, you know, those are things I generally, especially now in the fall when the elk are moving a lot, hunting season has started, the elk get a little nervous, they're kind of trying to move around a bit more. It's something we really have to look at and manage. If you live close to like a garbage dump or really in the bush, you can expect more chances of predation. So, you know, this is just like a little bit of a risk assessment of things that you can do to consider. I'm not saying you have to write it all down, but it's definitely things to consider in how to control or reduce conflict. So if you do have a kill, there's some things that I would definitely make sure that everyone does and knows. Anyone who works on your ranch needs to know what to do when there's a livestock kill. So if it is a kill that can be compensated, you definitely need to call the authorities like Fish and Wildlife. If they're damaged animals, have your vet's phone number on hand. You have to find a way to protect that carcass. So you're going to have to put some fencing around it, cover it with a tarp so that Fish and Wildlife can assess the damage. But most importantly, predators come back to a kill. If they don't take it away completely the first day, they'll come back the second day, they'll come back the third day. So you need to move your livestock out of that area if there's any possibility you can. So with the sheep, I use border collies. I can quickly change them to a completely different pasture. And usually what I'll do is I'll bring them right close to the farmyard area, at least for about a week, just so you break that cycle that those predators are in. Suddenly the animals are gone. It's not how it used to be. Things change around. I usually will add in 2 or 3 extra Livestock Guardian dogs. I'll make sure my electric fencing is as hot as it can be. If needs be, I'll even night corral them. So you have to take some form of action to protect those livestock. The other thing is when you can dispose of that carcass, I find composting is the best way to get rid of it. I have a compost pile right close to the barnyard area. Because if you don't dig a hole deep enough, the predators will dig it up. Dumping it in the back just keeps the problems going. So, you know, disposing of that properly is a good way to go. Secure your fencing. If you can see where a coyote's digging in or out or into your sheep field, then, you know, shore up the fencing and kind of make a long-term plan of what you can and cannot do. So let's look at some of the proactive solutions we can have. So I am a firm believer that Livestock Guardian dogs on any serious sheep or cattle operation that is having predation problems, Livestock Guardian dogs is probably one of your best measures to use. There are other guardian animals, so some people use llamas, other people use donkeys. I'll touch on them briefly. And then there's some management strategies we can use. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about guardian dogs. So guardian dogs have been used for thousands of years. They're actually the original sheepdog. If people talk about sheepdogs, they actually mean livestock guardian dogs. Herding dogs, such as border collies, were developed way later for their specific function. So why would you use a livestock guardian dog? Well, they'll keep your stock safe, which is actually your primary reason for wanting to keep them. Research has found that if you have livestock guardian dogs in with your sheep will tend to graze further away from like the farmyard area. They feel more comfortable, they feel safer to graze further. And that is something we've noticed with our sheep flock. If we are putting the sheep in the heavy bush at the back, if the guardian dogs don't go in with the sheep don't even want to go through the gate because they know all bad things, all wild things live in the bush. So, you know, they open up areas so we have more grazing available simply because we have the dogs in with the stock. The livestock, if they're used to guardian dogs, and this usually takes a while, they build a really strong trust relationship with the dogs. So we had a cougar in our area a couple of years ago. The neighbors lost a colt to the cougar. And we could see on the behavior of the sheep and the dogs that there was something different than normal. And the sheep really responded very strongly to the guardian dogs. They would stand behind the guardian dogs. They wouldn't go anywhere where the guardian dogs were not. So the sheep actually learn to trust the dog, and they kind of rally behind the dog if they're feeling unsafe. So, you know, it's a really interesting relationship that develops between them. Livestock that are used to having guardian dogs around them are calmer. So for people who run, for example, yearlings, everyone knows that yearlings are just troublemakers. They scatter, they run, they make, they're just difficult to deal with. Wolves capitalize on that. So wolf will just do like a charge at the yearlings. Everything scatters, one splits off, and that's the one that they'll go after. If your stock are used to guardian dogs, they'll tend to flock or herd, stay together better. They'll be less likely to scatter if a wolf makes a mock charge at them. It's harder then for predators to actually get in there and get what they want, which is, of course, a calf or a lamb. Livestock guardian dogs work 24/7, 365 days a year, and they work for probably about $1 a day in dog food and a few pets and a couple of good boys. And they never mouth you off, and they never complain, and they're generally pretty reliable. They're relatively cheap in comparison to other forms of protection. If you're going to build fencing that is so good that you can keep a wolf pack out, you're going to need to go to a zoo and look at their 10-foot high fencing, moats, and electric fencing to keep a wolf in. It's too expensive on most ranches to be able to fence wildlife out. So guardian dogs is a pretty good option. They're very effective. In America, they found that over 82% of ranchers who use livestock guardian dogs say that they're highly effective. They perceive it as a very effective strategy. Livestock guardian dogs are proactive. So you might not have a predation event happening because you have the dog there, even though you're not counting how many kills or how many coyotes the dog kills. It's how many kills he has prevented simply by having his presence there. And I think that is something to be aware of. It's not always about, you know, my dog saved or, you know, we didn't lose those 3 lambs because the dog was there, right? So that is something to be aware of. And it allows for coexistence because the dogs will most of the time just chase or deter the predators. They will occasionally, if they can get a hold of one, they would kill a coyote. But the fact that they're taking up also territory and they're claiming that the sheep in that space for theirs means that the predators will move further back, stay further away, but they can carry on living their predator life. So a livestock guardian dog has two mandates, and the first one is he's got to keep predators away, and his second one, he shouldn't harm the livestock. And other than that, the dog doesn't have to do anything else. He just has to do those two jobs, and if he does that, he's a successful livestock guardian dog. You do not expect your livestock guardian dog to be a herding dog in that he's going to herd the sheep around or guide the sheep in any direction. He just has to live with them, keep predators away, and not harm the sheep himself. So what do they guard? Well, they can guard anything, pretty much. They were never bred, however, in the countries of origin to be poultry dogs or guarding rabbits and things like that. They were bred primarily to protect hoofed livestock, so sheep, goats, cattle, things like that. However, you are seeing a little bit of a shift, and people are starting to use them for other projects. They're getting more and more used to protect endangered wildlife. In Australia, there's some little plant that's really very rare, and the deer like to eat them, so they're using livestock guardian dogs to chase the deer out of these areas to protect the plant. There was recently not recently, a couple of years back, a film made about a guardian dog called Oddball, and he was used to protect these little penguins off an island off Australia's coast, because the foxes would swim across to the island, eat all these little rare penguins, and they couldn't stop that, so they trained a livestock guardian dog to protect the penguins from being predated on. So you see that there's more uses for the livestock guardian dogs being developed and evolving, but primarily livestock guardian dogs are bred to protect hoofed stock. So just some images of different guardian dogs and different jobs there. There are over 40 breeds of livestock guardian dogs. They all work in a pretty similar manner. They're just slight temperament differences between the dogs. Some are a little bolder, some are a little more aggressive, some are more mountain type dogs, heavier set. Others are more what I call steppe or desert kind of dogs, so they're more racy, more active. But they all do the same job. So what is the job that these livestock guardian dogs do? So the first thing is you do want them to bond to the stock, because generally in the countries where these dogs were bred, they don't really use fencing as a way of containing livestock. So the dog needs to be where the livestock is. So you want the dog to build a bond with that livestock, feel that the livestock belongs a little bit to them, so that they'll also feel the need to protect that livestock. They need to see the livestock as theirs. They need to see it as a form of companionship. They need to see it as a almost like a dependent. The dogs need to like view the livestock with that image. And from there, the dogs will then become, as they mature, they'll become protective towards what they're looking after. That is why they're called guardian dogs and not guard dogs, because they kind of have a nurturing guardian relationship with the livestock. Secondly, they do need to live with the livestock. For those people that say, I have a guardian dog, but he sleeps in the house. Well, if he's sleeping in the house, he cannot protect the livestock. If the livestock are without a dog, the coyotes will know it in no time, and they will learn the routine of, oh, during the day, the dog is with the livestock, but at night he goes into the house, so therefore it would be better to come around at night. For the dogs to be really effective, they do need to live with the livestock. The dogs claim both the territory and the space around the flock. So it's not necessarily a pasture, a specific pasture, although if you use a lot of fencing, then that fencing determines the territory or the space. But if you're on free grazing, larger areas, the dog needs to have like a an imaginary perimeter around that flock where they're going to stay with and guard that space. So as the flock grazes to different areas, the dog needs to move along with the flock. They also need to be protective of the animals, not just the area. So they do need to perceive that if an animal is threatened, a livestock is threatened, that they need to be protective of that animal. A lot of general farm dogs, for example, if you have a German Shepherd on your farm or a lab or whatever, they're protective of the area and they'll chase like a raccoon or whatever away, but they're not necessarily protective of the livestock. And that is the big difference between a livestock guardian dog and your general farm dog. They need that nurturing relationship with livestock, but they also need to be aggressive. They need to be aggressive enough to want to stand up to bold coyotes, to be brave enough to face off wolves if they come, to tree a bear. So there needs to be enough aggression in them that they can actually do the job if it comes down to it. It's not enough just to run at a coyote 50 meters, bark at it and come back. They need to be a little more determined to deter that coyote. So another way of working is they bark a lot. So if you have neighbors close by, livestock guardian dogs might not be a good solution because they tend to bark a lot. It is a way of telling predators, this is my area, this is my space, I live here, you stay away. They do a lot of scent marking, so they'll go around and pee on everything they possibly can just to, you know, claim that space. No different to how a coyote or a wolf will be. Coyotes, dogs, wolves, they each their own breed and species, but they do speak the same language, even though there's a bit of a dialect difference there. But they understand each other's behavior. The main thing is they like to just keep pushing predators further back. So, you know, you often hear about roaming guardian dogs. 9 times out of 10, they're just trying to push predators further and further back, except your neighbors and their neighbors don't necessarily appreciate your dog doing that job for them. But that is sort of what they like to do. I spoke about speaking the same language. So I had a YouTube video up, and if you want to write down that link that's on the screen there to watch it yourself, and it is some imaging that was done in Italy of livestock guardian dogs and wolf interactions. And you can actually see very good how they interact. I'm not going to go to that YouTube video right now because I'm having a few technical issues here. But if you want to have a look, it shows different interactions of how, you know, the wolves go and spook up a bunch of sheep, how the dogs respond. So you get a really good idea of how these dogs can work. And if anybody needs like any links or would like any more information, you're welcome to contact the Battle River Research Station and they can get you in contact with me. So the thing with guardian dogs is it's not perfect, right? Dogs also have issues. Not everyone is a dog person. Not everyone can really work with dogs. Some people just find it too much effort because it takes a while and it does take effort. And things go wrong when you don't deal with the issues with livestock guardians. So the biggest thing I find, and I've been helping people for many, many years using guardian dogs, is they go on Kijiji, they find a great Pyrenees pup, and they put it with sheep because that's what they've heard that they have to do. But then they don't know what to do after that. And a lot of things go wrong. And there's not enough mentorship and there's not enough guidance on how to get that pup to being a successful guardian dog. And I think that is a big problem. And part of the problem is the way we get our dogs. We just usually have a woman think, oh, I need a guardian dog. The first and best one that you think is a Pyrenees or whatever you get, instead of looking at like, hey, does it work with the livestock that, like, do the parents work with the livestock that I'd like him to work with? Are the parents good, reliable dogs? Will the breeder of that dog help me if I have questions or if I'm unsure of how to do things? So, you know, it needs a little bit more thought to buying the dog that's going to have the most chance of success with your operation. So I think that is the big gap in the whole learning of working with livestock guardian dogs. A lot of owners are inexperienced, and you can go onto Facebook or wherever, and you'll get 1,000 people answering a question with 1,000 different opinions. And really, your breeder should be your first person to ask, like, hey, my pup is 8 months old and he's kind of chasing the sheep around, or he's biting ears or pulling wool. What can I do best? And your breeder should be able to guide you in how to deal with that dog's problem. If it's a good breeder, it'll know how the parents were working. It'll know sort of they will know how to guide you in those kind of problems. Most often what happens, you get the dog, nobody's willing to support you, you run into trouble, the dog is 8 months old, you chews the ears off a lamb, and you just don't know how to move forward. So, really consider who you buy a dog from. Are they able to mentor you? Do the dogs work with the right livestock and in a way that suits your situation? Those are really things that'll determine the success of a Livestock Guardian dog. There's also a lack of good information. So there were a whole bunch of studies in the 1980s, and although those studies are extremely good and extremely helpful, and a lot of dogs were studied, there are some concepts there that are a little outdated now. And one of them is, oh, you can never pet your guardian dog, or you can never, show him any real kindness. You've got to just like leave him alone. Things like that. The reason they were used is because people didn't know how to work with these dogs. These dogs, you can pet them and you can treat them kindly and whatever, but they still need to live with the livestock. The problem is when we start trying to make pets out of working dogs and using a bit of pet mentality of, oh, they need to live in the house and bond with the family. Well, you're not going to get a Livestock Guardian dog from that. So, having good information is really important. Well, I discussed poorly bred and wrong breeds. The number of people that call me and they say, I just bought an Irish Wolfhound and, to guard my sheep. And then you say, well, why did you buy an Irish Wolfhound? Well, wolfhounds hunt wolves. But what many people fail to realize is that wolfhounds were also stag or deer hunting dogs and wolf dogs. They are hounds. They're not guardian dogs. It's the wrong breed for the wrong job. Or they'll say, oh, I've got my St. Bernard to guard my sheep. Well, what they forget is even though St. Bernards are big dogs and heavy coated and they kind of look like a lot of the Livestock Guardian dog breeds, St. Bernards don't have the temperament to face up to an ornery bear or, a pack of wolves. They're not bred to be aggressive enough, and they're not bred to be that nurturing kind of dog with the sheep. So, you really have to be careful in that you get the right dog for the right job. Of course, people have issues, behavioral issues. So as I discussed, roaming or excessive barking, playing with the livestock, and they just don't know how to solve those problems. So mentoring is the key word here. Livestock Guardian dogs are also not an instant solution. If you have a predation problem today, buying your Livestock Guardian today is not going to solve that problem, because if you buy a pup, it's going to take, until it's an adult or mature before it's really super effective. Most Livestock Guardian dogs that get sold at an older age either have problems like those behavioral problems, or they're just not doing the job, because very few livestock operations will sell their best dogs. So the only time you can really get a hold of a good dog is if you if there's like a herd dispersal, or if it's somebody you know personally. So it does take time and effort to ensure that they are effective. So are they suitable for everyone? My answer to that short answer is no, because it takes time. A lot of people buy them because they have 3 chickens and a fainting goat. Well, that's not really the situation where a Livestock Guardian dog will thrive in. And your money might be better spent to build a good chicken coop or fence in the pasture for the goat, rather than spending all the time, money, and effort on trying to work with a guardian dog to get it reliable around chickens. if you work with Livestock Guardian dogs, it is going to require a bit of a management change in how you work with your sheep as well, because that dog's going to need to be fed every day. Sheep graze and eat grass. Dogs need specific type of food. Sheep love dog food, so you're going to have to be able to feed the dog separately or make a feeding station for him. So, it requires a bit of management. Your flock might have to get used to a dog. Some might never get used to the dog and always be beating up on the dog or be terrified running into fences. So it definitely requires a sort of a new approach. The stock definitely need an adjustment period. And you kind of have to like dogs. If you don't like dogs, working with Livestock Guardian dogs is probably not going to be successful. Depending on your area, you're going to need either very good fencing if you're in an area with lots of acreages, because these dogs are used to working in big, expansive, often mountainous terrains, and suddenly they are down to like a couple of acres, and they just don't have the work. And so they're going to find work. They're going to roam. They're going to get into trouble. So you either need very good fencing or you need a lot of space. Neighbors and barking dogs is never a good thing. And not every guardian dog works out. You could have the best bred guardian dog in the whole world. He can come from impeccable parents. And research in Georgia has shown that still about 20% will fail. And whether it's the dog's fault or the owner's fault, or it doesn't matter who's at fault, about 20% of guardian dogs do fail, no matter how well bred they are. Part of that failure is that they could be just not protective enough, or not attentive enough, or they just don't care for sheep, or, it's just not their thing. So, not every dog is successful. And there's a cost to it, getting a pup, raising it, feeding it every day. Dog food nowadays is not cheap. So what is the value of a guardian dog? So a study done back in 2000 said that dogs showed a reduction of predation between 11 and 100%, which is actually fairly good statistics on the 100% side. The 11% probably falls in the dogs in that failure percentage, the dogs that were not really successful enough. And 82% of producers who use Livestock Guardian dogs saw them as an economic asset. So they found that they reduced predation enough that it was economically viable to use them. And there's a bit of a discussion about return of investment. If you spend so much on the dog, sort of, if he saves 3 lambs or 4 lambs a year, he's pretty much paid for himself. I find the peace of mind is also really important. I know I can turn my sheep out into bushy pastures and I don't have to be super worried about them. And I think that peace of mind has a big value as well. So just a couple of pictures of the dogs. So my dogs will guard a dead sheep carcass. I know that's a bit of a gruesome photo there. Until I remove that sheep, they will not allow predators to scavenge on it. They will chase ravens away. And I really appreciate that because I like to know what my sheep died of. And I like to have a whole body of a sheep to look at, to know, oh, the sheep died of bloat or whatever. So I appreciate that of my dogs and that I can then dispose of that carcass. We raise our dogs with our cattle and they get along famously. Any weather, they're out there doing their job. We like to bond the heifers, our replacement heifers, with our dogs so they grow up knowing them. Here's just a picture. We knew we had some predators in the back in the bush there, and you can see how the dogs form like a perimeter around the sheep to ensure that they are protected. So some of the other animals that people use as guardians are donkeys and llamas. Sometimes, keeping like bulls in with your cows can help a little bit on the protective side. Having mature animals in with so if you're calving heifers on their own, they can be really silly. But if you have a couple of old, steady, been there, done that type of cows in with a group, they might, be able to be a bit more protective. So those are some considerations that you can look at there. I like that saying that was a wolf pup that was raised, not raised on our farm. We didn't raise it, but the female wolf raised on our ranch. So I have a little video here of some of the wolves on our ranch, and I can give you a brief rundown of the story of how it happened that these wolves were on our farm. Is we made a lot of mistakes one year. We had a couple of cows that drowned in a dugout because we didn't fence our dugout, so that's a big no-no. And so it was the middle of winter and we needed to get rid of them. So we dumped them in the back 40 because there were just too many to dig a big hole. We then closed the gate to the back because we didn't want our dogs going there and scavenging on those cow carcasses. So the whole winter, our dogs were not at the back of the ranch. Come spring, well, actually June, we were going out to mow some grass and there were these 7 little wolf puppies running around. And we realized what had happened is the wolves were attracted to the carcasses we dumped there. Because our dogs were closed off from going to the back part of the ranch, they felt that they were safe and protected. The female denned in that area and raised those pups in the back of the farm. And it was because of multiple mistakes that we made is why those wolves felt that they were safe and comfortable in our area. And it took us the entire summer to convince these wolves to move along and move out. And anyone who's interested, I have a long story about that, but I'm not going to carry on with that today. But, you know, even though you think we do a lot right, we still make mistakes. And sometimes you can't avoid making mistakes. So, you know, we learned our lesson there, and now our gateways stay open, and we now compost all our carcasses. So just to give you an idea of proximity, these were the wolf pups. That is our calving barn in the background. So they were really close. We had calving cows, calving sheep at the time that these wolves were on our farm. The good thing is they never predated on anything. We learned a lot about management and we learned a lot about wolf behavior. So we did, because the wolf den was in that area, we decided to do a lot of like a little bit of fence line clearing with an excavator because we decided we needed to be in that area to discourage the wolves from staying much longer. So we did a lot of work in that area. We went riding there often, just to make the wolves feel uncomfortable. So that's briefly the story there. So when it comes to management practices, there's not a one size fits all. It does require a change of mindset to be good there. My next few slides, I'm actually going to go through them quite quickly because I know you guys can read faster than what I can talk. But these will be more focused on some options other than guardian dogs or combined with guardian dogs, because the best way is to layer strategies, to have like good fencing and guardian dogs and electric fencing and calving at a different time, things like that. So if you can layer your approach, that is kind of the best way to mitigate a problem. So, you know, as I discussed earlier, being aware of your terrain, if you're going to set up your grazing passes right next to your carcass dump, well, maybe that's not the wisest thing to do. It would be okay if you did it at a different time, or if you manage that a little closer, things like that. So just being aware of your terrain. As I said earlier about subdividing pasture, with the sheep, we actually do a lot of night corralling. This time of the year, those coyote pups are 5-6 months old. They're learning to hunt. The coyote pairs are out there every night and they want to teach those pups to become independent. And so we find we have a lot of coyote pressure at this time of the year, September, October. And so one of the things is we night corral. We bring the sheep every night back to a corral close to the barnyard area where the dogs are in with them, just to help prevent predation from happening. Smaller groups of sheep are easier to manage and you tend to get a little less predation than really big groups. So if you can and you have the pasture available, you know, splitting up the sheep if you have the dogs and the fencing, that is another good way to help manage it. Rotate pastures, subdivide are good ways to sort of mitigate some conflict. Fencing, so good fencing goes a long way. Good fences make good neighbors. It's always good to keep your stock where you need them. Most of the time, fencing will not keep predators out, but it will keep your livestock guardian dogs and your livestock where you know they should be. We use a lot of electric fencing. What you see in this picture is what's called fladry or turbo fladry. Highly, highly effective for calving pastures and for sheep and things like that. Somehow wolves really struggle to navigate through those red little flags, and turbo fladry is nothing more than electrified little red flags. So things like that. If you're calving in an area where you have a lot of wolf pressure or coyote pressure, putting up fladry around that calving field is really effective. The only thing is animals do habituate to it. So it's not something you want to leave up all year round. You want to kind of use it at specific times for it to be very effective. Take it down if you're not calving or lambing anymore. So to the left is a wolf fence that was constructed in Portugal to try and keep the wolves out. It's like a night corral. On the right is fencing a calving corral with fladry in Montana. Management is also just managing your animals. If you can take out the lame and the sick and the weak, that is what predators really like to go for. So, that kind of, don't leave a gimpy, limping sheep out there because it's a sitting duck. Researchers found that night corralling or putting them in a barn can reduce predation at night between 79 and 94%. So that's a huge management tool that doesn't take too much, because a night corral doesn't have to be more than a couple of electric nets right up close to the yard. I won't talk about the Spanish corral system because it's a highly expensive system that only works on if you have oodles of money. Carcass removal is an absolute huge one. If you can reduce it, you reduce predation by about 55 times. So that is very big, managing your dead stock. Sometimes you just have to herd and shepherd. Like, we go and check our cattle, we ride, we check them regularly. We try to do head counts as often as possible. Our sheep, I used to shepherd for many, many years. I can tell you how many times a sheep chews, its cud, because all I did was stand and look at sheep 8 hours a day. So, being out with your livestock will definitely make a huge difference if you're having predator issues. As I talked earlier about good neighbors, they need to clean up their dead stock as well. You need flexibility. If you're dealing with a lot of predator pressure, you need to have the flexibility to move animals around, change things around. I have multiple guardian dogs. They can work individually, they can work in groups. Sometimes I have 4 dogs in with a sheep and sometimes just 1, depending on where I think the dogs are needed the most. We struggle a lot with elk and elk eating our hay. So, we know we're dealing with hay predation as such. And, with the elks, not only the damage they do to the hay, but, wolves are following behind. So, it's a lot of moving parts that we need to manage. I talked about having some older cows in with your heifers, keeps the group calmer, things like that. So you really have to be there to manage your stock. Breeding for good maternal instincts. Those cows in the front are teaching that young bearer a good lesson that you don't come looking at our calves. You need animals that are going to do their job as well. It's not your job to mother that lamb or raise that calf. It's the cow's job. That's why you have that cow. So she needs to be protective enough to look after that calf, and you need to select for good, strong mothering instincts. With the sheep people, a lot of people get into sheep because they get a bottle lamb or whatever. But ultimately, your ewes should also be protective. They should also be stomping their feet and headbutting a coyote, or, being wise about it and being protective. So, breeding for good maternal instincts is important. I use my herding dogs. If I have to move livestock around quickly, my herding dogs provide me the opportunity to do so. There are some frightening devices, so like sound devices, motion activated sounds and lights and things like that. They work okay, but if you don't take them down at certain times, then the livestock habituate to them. A lot of people use fox lights. A lot of people have success with them, some more so than others. Rag boxes are just sound like wolf activated. In America, just about every wolf pack has one or two that has a radio collar on it so they can track them. And those radio collars, when they go past a rag box, it activates a sound, so it like frightens them away. Those are some more fancier ways of protecting your stock. In England, they've found that if you cover your lambs with little plastic coats, just to actually help them from getting hypothermia or getting too cold, but they've also found foxes actually don't like eating lambs that have plastic wrap around them. So, you know, that's something that could help as well if you're having a problem. In Poland, they would play recorded wolf howls around sheep flocks to try and keep other wolves away. In Idaho, they used one of those car salesman dancing man things. Found it super effective. Wolves did not know what to do with it, were very suspicious, tended to stay away. You know, changing routines is a good one. And, you know, sometimes the solution is to hunt and trap and be specific about the problem ones, keeping the good ones around, you know, paying attention to that. We are seeing more and more technology getting used now in wildlife conflict mitigation. So in Portugal, they were using a lot of birth detection. So they would have little devices on the goats, because a goat will creep into the bush, have a kid, and then get left behind when the shepherd moves on, and then be a target to predators. So the shepherd would get a little alarm saying, you know, this goat number is over there having her baby. Putting GPS trackers both on the Livestock Guardian dogs and on the livestock, so you can see where they are, where they're hanging out. There's a lot of invisible fences getting tested and used. In Switzerland, they developed a text messaging service that if the sheep up in the Alps were stressed and their heart rate went up and they were running and out of breath, the shepherd would get a text message that says, your sheep are stressed, you need to go and check them. Birth synchronization, like tightening up calving times, tightening up lambing times, so you have less long of a period to deal with where you have to protect those weak and vulnerable animals. The e-shepherd was developed in South Africa, and it's like a radio collar that's on the sheep, and when a predator wants to bite them, it sort of either sprays something at them or it emits a sound to try and scare them off. So you're seeing more technology getting used. I think that's going to be a growing industry in livestock management. Emergency help. That is actually something I think is really important. If people are struggling and they cannot seem to get a grip on the predation issues, sometimes they just need other people to come and help them. So a little bit of hands-on, like maybe help building a night corral. Maybe they need more education. I have loaned a guardian dog of mine to somebody who was losing sheep every day to coyotes. And I said, well, I have this dog. He is a spare dog to me. You can borrow him until you have another solution. And the day they took that dog, their problems stopped. So, you know, having just emergency help, maybe range riders. I had some people offering when those wolves were camping out on our farm that they would come and sit out with the cows, do a bit of range riding. You know, so I think sometimes people just need practical, hands-on kind of help. So I was talking about composting. I think that is really a good way of doing it. It's super simple to do, super cheap, and highly, highly effective. And for those people who don't know, it actually doesn't stink. So it's not a problem to have close to your barnyard area. So just to put some things in perspective, doing something is always better than doing nothing. So if all you can do is, for example, is put up some electric nets, it's always better than doing nothing. If you can do electric nets and a guardian dog, fantastic. If you have cattle and you have barbed wire and you could put 1 or 2 extra electric fencing strands over it, great. If you can tighten up your calving, fantastic. Something is always better than nothing. Don't have an illusion that predation will never happen. You can do the best you can, and sometimes it just happens. And I think, we need to share information, what works and what doesn't. If you happen to go to a conference somewhere and you hear that somebody did something and it sounds like a reasonable idea, try it. We need to share information. The predation problem is a worldwide problem, whether it's dingoes in Australia, whatever. We can deal with it if we share information, what is successful and what is not. So in conclusion, there are lots of options. Everything takes a bit of an investment, and you have to kind of weigh up like what is worth doing and what is not. But an integrated approach to predator control is the only way to kind of get a grip on things. And for some people, that is using guardian dogs. For some people, it's using a donkey or a llama. For some people, it's fencing. Having an integrated approach is kind of the best way to go about it, and to be flexible in implementing it.